org. In this hour, we're going to talk, at least at the top of the hour, about a very different story, but I think an important one that has gotten underreported and yet has significance even beyond the case itself, and that is the case of Noor Salman. Noor Salman is the widow of the Pulse shooter, and she on Friday was acquitted of charges that she was complicit in his act of violence. There are many overtones to this story, and our next guest has written about it, I think, and touched on a number of those issues. Maha Ahmed is a journalist and a fellow with The Intercept. Her piece on Noor Salman was entitled "The Prosecution of Noor Salman, Pulse Shooter's Widow Highlights the Criminalization of Domestic Abuse Survivors," and she joins us now. So first of all, Maha, thanks for coming on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And secondly, it seems that at least in the end, justice was done. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I'm glad for Noor and her family that the acquittal ended up happening.
So let's talk about why the trial happened, because a lot of people felt this is a prosecution that never should have taken place. There was some surprise. What was Noor Salman charged with exactly?
Yeah, so she was charged with aiding and abetting the support of a foreign terrorist organization, which in this case was ISIS, and also for obstructing justice for allegedly lying to the FBI.
And she was, if I remember correctly, but please correct me if I'm wrong, she was actually kept in isolation. She was questioned for extended periods of time by the FBI. I think there was discussion. I don't think she signed a confession, but I think FBI claimed that she had made a confession. I'm not sure exactly what the sequence of events is. Maybe you can fill it in.
Yeah, so immediately after the shooting took place, the FBI kept Noor in an interrogation for about 17 hours without an attorney present. They didn't read her Miranda rights. And the confession that was one of the key pieces of evidence that the trial hinged on was actually written by the FBI agent that was questioning her and not Noor herself.
So there was a lot. That was questionable about this case. But one of the things you did in your reporting on it, which I thought was really important, was you tied it to the whole issue of domestic abuse survivors, which she most clearly was, and you established that case that the shooter Omar Mateen, his previous wife, told horrific stories of abuse. Noor Salman's family told stories of abuse, and apparently it's not unusual for a woman who has suffered this kind of abuse to wind up herself being prosecuted, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, I think it's definitely way more commonplace than most people know for an abuse victim to be not only arrested for and charged with, but actually sentenced to prison time for crimes that her abuser actually committed. And I mean, I've spoken to numerous legal and legislative advocates, former attorneys, some of whom have been working with incarcerated abuse victims for decades, and they've all described seeing dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of cases like Noor's. And I mean, I think Noor's case was unique in the sense that it was focusing on an alleged act of terrorism as opposed to what is more common, which is felony murder or assault charges or drug-related charges that abuse victims end up being charged with for things that their abusers did. And there aren't good statistics to measure the exact phenomenon, but we do know that the vast majority of women in prisons and jails around the country were in fact abuse victims prior to their incarceration.
And when I try to sort of tease this out in my own mind, and again, we're talking with Maha Ahmed of The Intercept, when I try to tease this out in my own mind, I wonder, there are multiple factors that could be in play. One is just straight up sexism, that somehow she's the woman, she must have known, the husband is the head of the family, that kind of, and she must have been subordinate to him and helping him in some way. Another is that it seems to me that maybe prosecutors and judges and juries don't understand the nature of abuse and the fact that it could be that they may be thinking, well, if I knew that someone in my family was planning a crime, I'd tell somebody, not understanding that to live under severe domestic abuse is to live in constant and abject terror a lot of the time, where you literally don't feel you have that option and probably don't have the option because you're being watched, you're being monitored, you're being beaten, and so on. Is that kind of what we're seeing in a lot of these cases?
Yeah, I definitely think that that's a huge part of it. I think in a lot of these cases, people ask, why didn't they go to the police earlier? If abuse victims had reported the actions of their partner to the authorities, and the whole crime could have been prevented, or so many lives could have been saved. But I think what people don't realize is that for so many, if not most, abuse victims, that even if they do know about what their partners are doing or planning on doing, what's at the forefront of their mind every single day is just trying to survive as best they can. And I mean, in a lot of cases when victims do end up even going to the authorities, they either get swept up and arrested anyway, or they, aren't believed. So I think that that's something that we have to keep in mind when thinking about these sorts of cases.
And it seems to me, we're going to run out of time shortly, but it seems to me that we also need to educate judges, juries, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and the public at large that abused women are not collaborators. They are fellow victims when a crime takes place. We got about 30 seconds. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you that it's a matter of making especially prosecutors aware of the role that abuse plays. But I also want to emphasize that while I'm glad that that Noor Salman's acquittal happened, it's definitely rare. There are so many abuse victims who are defendants in less high-profile cases that don't benefit from the level of media scrutiny that this case got, and they're either awaiting trial or in courtrooms right now or sitting in prisons, and I think they deserve a similar level of justice that Noor Salman was able to get on Friday.
Well said. And let us not forget that Noor Salman also endured many months of terrible treatment for a crime she did not commit, and that's an injustice too. So Maha Ahmed of The Intercept, journalist and fellow at The Intercept, thanks for the great reporting and thanks for coming on the program. And for the rest of you, I would just say this: sexism takes many forms, and while the debate has often been about sexism in the workplace, sexism among executives and business people, lean in, that sort of thing, we need to talk about how sexism affects the most needy of us as well. We will be right back after this. I am Richard R.J. Escow, sitting in for Thom on the Thom Hartmann Program.